Eric, you earned a math degree, right?
Sure. Yep, absolutely.
Can you tell me more about how someone having a math degree ends up in as a status quo disruptor?
Sure. Out of college, studying actuarial science, I wanted to get into being an actuary. What I quickly found out was it took a really long time to become a full fellow from the Society of Actuaries, but also I realized that I enjoyed doing things from a number crunching from a technical standpoint. So I got into underwriting out of college instead of getting into actuarial science. And that actually was what led me to benefits consulting, because I was doing the underwriting thing and handing things off to sales folks and wondering, why couldn't I do that? I learned the technical stuff. I feel like I can provide a lot of knowledge and experience and information in general. And I feel like I have the personality to be able to speak to folks. So I got into the benefits consulting world after being a group underwriter, and I've been doing that ever since.
Here's my question.
Sure.
So you're mostly coming out from, you said that you're coming from underwriting, so you spend lots of times watching the numbers and actually putting the numbers together. Do you think the
hmm
numbers are the major factor in decision making in healthcare and what the employees do? I mean, what have you observed in the brokerage world that made you think like, yeah, I want to talk to the employer by myself and I want to be the one who will convince them?
Well, I just feel like what we do in benefits consulting is very impactful and fulfilling. 20 years ago, I didn't think we'd be here today. I just feel like it's just continued to a point where I made a decision 15 years ago when I was doing kind of the status quo thing. I learned pretty quickly that there is a better way of doing things instead of just kind of kowtowing to the anthems and the UHCs of the world. And that's where I decided to become more of a disruptor and kind of buck the status quo, so to speak, from advice and from a counsel standpoint. And I feel like I'm a rare breed, and I feel like I'm doing the right thing on behalf of the client and their employees, as opposed to just kowtowing to the what I would call the healthcare cartel. And there's a lot of players that I could spend hours discussing who those are. And I think people are probably pretty familiar with who those names are that are probably part of what I would deem as the cartel of healthcare in the United States.
And yet, I mean, there are lots of companies out there that know how the system works, but they're still part of the system. And
Correct.
they get their spreadsheet, they get their renewal increase every single year, whether it's 12% or 18%. We're not talking about situations when the cousin is managing healthcare in the organization, not that type of, situations.
Right.
When the company knowingly makes that decision because there's kind of a big brand name on the card and that's what they're paying for. And the whole
Right.
idea is that this whole thing is not marketed well enough within employees to become a competitive advantage on the job market. How do you solve this problem? Because, this is part of actually this is big part of converting the company from fully insured to self-funded. I might be
Sure.
wrong, but
No, no. I take the approach from a education and from a counsel standpoint. I don't try to air fingers quote sell people. I try to educate them on what's really going on behind the scenes, because believe it or not, 95 times out of 100, their current advisor isn't giving them the full array of what their options can be and what's really going on behind the scenes. Because unfortunately
why?
in our because
Can't think why?
sure, two things. Number one, it's very lucrative for and very easy for an advisor to just do the status quo thing. It's a lot of work to not do the status quo. Number two, unfortunately, in our industry, there's too many folks out there that would rather work less and make more than work more and maybe make less, but it's impactful and it's the right thing to do on behalf of the client.
I would also add long term. I don't see many people who are playing a long-term game on this market. They get the project. They think that this project will last for another 1 or 2 years. They
Hmm.
try to make most out of it, and then they're out. Although they can, I mean, the average tenure of a normal self-funding broker when you convert the company from full insured to self-funded is 5 to 7 years. If you don't screw up, of course. And we're not
Correct.
talking about like, that kind of brokers, but usually it's 5 to 7 years. So if you will think about in perspective, those brokers that you just talked about are losing money, they're not gaining.
Well, they're I don't want to say they're losing money. They're watching things head down an unsustainable path for their client or the employer, and they're just making money off that. And unfortunately, when the broker or the advisor, I'm sorry, when the employer is just given one or two different options and not really given the full spectrum of what they could potentially do to help contain cost and really head down a sustainable path. They just kick the can down the road and continue to just take on double digit, 15, 20% increases. And eventually you come to a point where you got to make a decision. You got to make it a drastic change. And unfortunately, it's too late in those regards. Now you're losing employees. You're spending a ton of money, overhead expense. Your employees are spending a lot. I relish those opportunities because I see them way too many times, and eventually, this I always say the chickens come to roost at some point, and people actually see the light and go, you know what? The light bulb comes on, and I need to go down another path because where I'm heading is just unsustainable for not only us as a company, but our employees as well.
I hope that more brokers get to this path and more clients get to this path. And here's my question, next question that's coming out from your comment. Who is the biggest status quo advocate within the organization that is working in the organization, in your opinion? I mean, what you observed in your career.
Are you talking about from an employer standpoint, or are you
Yeah,
talking about?
I mean, who is the biggest advocate for things staying the same within the organization?
I hate to admit it because it's one of the hardest working jobs in the company, but from an HR standpoint, I see that all
Agree.
the time, in part because anything involving change triggers negativity, number one. Number two, if you were to find something on their watch that benefits the employees and the company, they get really guarded thinking that you're basically going to get to a point where their job will no longer be needed or their services will no longer be needed or they will no longer have a job. So I think the first part is very important. The fact that change always seems to trigger a negative connotation to an HR or benefits person. But number two, they get really defensive, even though you're there on behalf of them to take to assist in their daily lives because they wear many hats other than benefits. But they take offense to it sometimes to a point where they shut you down. They basically will kick and scream to a point that the CFO or the C-suite says, you know what, we can't make the change. I'm not going to oversee my HR director or my CHRO or my benefits manager because they don't really want to make a change. Those seem to be the two biggest factors I run into in regards to roadblocks when it comes to staying with the status quo internally
Wait,
within a company.
you just said that CFO, I mean, sometimes HR becomes so defensive that even CFO can, who's actually standing usually, on a level higher, even they don't want to, have this controversial situation within the organization, right? Is that
Yes.
what you're saying? Oh my God.
Yep. It's
It is
unfortunately,
true. I mean, I'm just happy to hear it from you. This
yeah.
is what we observe on the market as
Well,
well.
unfortunately, I hate to say it because it's tough, but it's true. When it comes to like HR and with companies that they don't have any ownership or stock or whatever, if it's use the adage, if it's not their money, it's not their problem. And if it's not going to impact them, I guarantee you, Margot, if they were running Jane Doe Inc. and they were cutting checks out of their own checking account for their employees' health insurance, I guarantee you they would have concerns and would do whatever they could to help contain the costs. But since it's not coming out of their check or their salary or their bank account, it's not that big of a deal to them.
I can tell you that there are some people who even are ready to actually, I observed that a lot when I was working on stock market. People I would observe on the background, of course, as a broker, I would observe people losing money and going, like, deep, deep, deep down because they cannot admit that they made a wrong deal.
Hmm.
And that's what I see all the time happening on the healthcare market because employers, they don't want to admit that they've made the wrong decision a couple of years ago, not switching their their plan and not going towards the direction they should have been gone. And now, as you said, they're like stuck in the situation when it's like whole snowball. It's not like just one increase problem. It's like
Right.
whole snowball out of, employer retention problem and this employee, sorry, retention problem and et cetera, and salaries and co-payments and everything. But HR, they're actually paid for status quo in their company in their position because they're usually hiring people to make them stay and to make things stay. Okay. They're not encourage I mean, their position does not encourage them to make lots of changes. Personally, I try to get rid of HR in a deal at the beginning stages as much as possible. And for our clients, that's what we do. But I feel really, I know why they do what they do and why they protect that they're not stupid, they're not dumb, they're not, they're just doing what their job is encouraging them. And what is the one thing I don't ask you to share your secrets, but what is one thing that calms them down usually? Well, if they're able to listen, you know.
I think the thing that calms them is at least what we provide from a service standpoint is that we pride ourselves on giving complete full white glove concierge treatment, not only within the confines of the company from an infrastructure standpoint, but also from an employee and from a member standpoint. So if there's a change that would be significant, we would handle all the educating and communicating. We literally give every employee our our contact information, our cell phone number, because some of these things are very different changes that they're not going to be used to up front. But eventually they get used to it and they see the opportunities and they see the benefits and the value perception from the employee standpoint while they see the costs going down significantly. And I think it ends up being a win-win, not just for the company and for HR, but also for the employees as well, which is obviously arguably their most important asset that they have.
That's absolutely true. I mean, I could add from my standpoint, like the thing that I personally use for my clients is if I see HR, I mean, I cannot work my way around them. I prepare a whole bunch. I sit down with the client and I prepare a whole bunch of emotionally driven case studies, very like super specific ones
Hmm.
and like where we dive deep into emotions, like what people experience and what kind of compensation they got, what happened before, what happened after. And this is how I get to the HR because this is the only conversation that I can have with HR that is responsive because then they go, okay, I had this kind of case before and it didn't end well. And oh my God, I mean, I could have handled it this way. Okay, let me listen, because speaking numbers to HR and saying that we're going to save that kind of money, this kind of amount, et cetera, it's just not, it doesn't go to their wheelhouse. So yeah, they're a tough one. Okay, we spoke about the toughest person in the organization. What about the person who helps you make the deal? Who that person is.
That's easy. That's usually, again, me being a kind of a technical numbers guy, it's usually the VP of finance, the CFO. When you put what you're speaking to in real tangible numbers that don't lie, and it's significant dollars, it's really tough for them to walk away from it, or at least to have a conversation with the HR, the benefits team, obviously other members of the C-suite. But you know, in this day and age, it's a lot driven by dollars and cents. So getting the bean counter, the CFO, or the the VP of finance or the controller involved is huge because again, cost isn't always the key factor, but it's a huge factor in the decision making process.
It is. It is. Absolutely. And that's what actually surprises me, that even today, people are, companies are just accepting, uh, I don't know, 15% increase. But when the brokers call them directly,
Hmm.
did you notice how difficult it is to even get in touch with a company nowadays? Um,
Yeah, there's a lot of walls to break, and screening calls and not reading emails or getting it thrown into spam, all those things. Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
exactly. And
Yeah.
HR is not answering the phones. They're not even reviewing the options anymore unless you focus your attention and actually start to prospect on this group and contact multiple decision makers and keep in touch with them and et cetera, et cetera. It's not like, in good old days when we just called and got to the gatekeeper, and then you needed to use several magic words and be nice to the gatekeeper. But when the gatekeeper connected you to the person, right, to the HR or CFO or CEO, there was actual person. Now it's a voicemail that they don't even listen to.
Correct.
And this whole process, I mean, it became more and more difficult, and they're not even reviewing the options at the renewal. They just are accepting the increase. Do you think it's
No.
gonna change in 2026? Hopefully.
Yes. Yes, because I think that the buzzword or words in 2026 in our line of business is fiduciary risk. So you've probably been hearing a lot that's been going on in the legal world with litigation, with class action lawsuits. And then now you've got even brokers getting sued by their clients or former clients because of not upholding their fiduciary responsibility. I think that's going to fall on employees or employers a lot in 2026. I feel like again, it's a very small snowball, but I think eventually it's going to get larger and larger because there are just a plethora of employers out there that are not compliant in regards to being true fiduciaries of their plan assets when it comes to their health insurance. And I think they're going to start, it's going to be more of a priority for employers to really dot all the I's and cross all the T's to make sure that both from a compliance and just from an employee based standpoint, that they're doing the right thing on behalf as a fiduciary um player in regards to the health plan and the health plan assets. I think that's going to be critical. I think 2025 was a nice springboard into 26, which I think is going to be a full scale evaluation of employers making sure that they're doing the right thing from a fiduciary standpoint.
And here's my another question that I just had as you were talking about that. Do you think they didn't realize all that time that they were kind of not compliant with all the standards, and they were like functionally, most of the companies that we were talking about today's, they were like functionally uninsured. Do you think they were not aware of it, or they were aware of it, they were consciously doing that, and it's just time to stop doing that?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think they were maybe aware of it or partly aware of it, but here's the problem, Margot, is that if nobody's policing it, you can get away with it. You know what I mean? It's like, you don't get a traffic ticket until you get actually caught, right? I speed all the time, but technically you're not speeding until you actually get caught. It's the same here.
If no one sees that, is it true really?
Yeah, I mean, until unless there's somebody policing what is not happening in regards to upholding your fiduciary responsibility, they're just going to continue along. And I think that's going to we're going to have to pump the brakes here in a little bit because of some of the things that are coming out. And again, here's the thing, it's not just the company. If there's ever a suit, what HR and the CFOs need to realize is that when you're named in a complaint, you're on the hook on your own. You got to get your own legal counsel. You're not going to be represented. You're going to be a separate entity from your company or the CFO or the CEO. If you're named in a lawsuit, you're on your own for the most part. Now, yeah, they could probably compensate you for your legal bills, but your name's out there on your own. So these people that feel that they're going to be insulated by their company, no, if you look at all these recent litigation class action lawsuits, they're naming the HR director, they're naming the CFO, they're naming the CEO. It's not just XYZ company. They're naming specific decision makers that were not upholding or being alleged of not upholding their fiduciary responsibility.
What do you think will happen to, let's say, 500 plus groups who continued cooperating with big names for years and years just because of, once again, the big name on the card? What will
Yeah,
happen to those? Like lots of lawsuits?
yeah, I think they're going to start getting called out. I mean, I hate to admit it, but there are definite firms out there that are focusing solely on disgruntled employees for employer groups that feel like they're getting fleeced in regards to what they're having to pay for medications, for hospital bills. I'm just telling you, a lot of employers out there are doing the status quo, and they're going to get caught if they're doing the fully insured Anthem thing, or they're partially self-funded doing the bundled ASO Optum United Healthcare thing. They're going to get exposed because of the games that are being played behind the scenes, and they can't claim ignorance anymore. It's 2026. It's not 2006. There's just too much out there. There's been too much scrutinized for you to say, "Oh, I wasn't aware of that." No, that's hogwash. I mean, there's just been way too much in the public eye to say that you didn't know. It's just not going to work in the court of law, in front of a jury, or in front of a judge, if in fact it ever gets to that point.
What is your plan on educating the CEOs? But actually, what is your plan on educating HRs and CFOs in 2026
I'm
on
just
this
going to
topic?
Yeah. So I always use the analogy of a teeter totter approach. Okay. So on one end of the teeter totter is cost, and the other end of the teeter totter is convenience. And usually what happens is that you offset one for the other. So want, if your priority is cost and you want to bring cost down, you have a tendency of making it inconvenient because of some of the changes in the strategies you put in place. If convenience is your number one priority, that's great, but the costs are going to continue to rise. If you can kind of picture a teeter totter, what I'm going to educate people on is how to keep the teeter totter level where you can get equal convenience and keep the convenience at a affordable and reduced cost. And there are strategies and solutions to be able to do that, which is what I am out there kind of preaching the gospel with employers on, that their current advisor is not presented or brought forth, that I think could be a win-win for not only the employer itself, but also their employee base.
Lots of actually employers take a look at healthcare only 1 month or 2 months before the renewal, and before that they try to ignore all the materials, all the emails and everything. So do you think there is, in your standpoint, do you think there is a way to get in touch with these people and explain urgency to them right now, that they need to get involved in their healthcare plan and with education, like in January, February, March, April, and not September, October, November?
I sure hope so. I make a valid effort to try to do so, but unfortunately, until there's a paradigm shift, a lot of employers use kind of the 11th hour approach when it comes to benefits, particularly health insurance. But I think in 2026, things are going to start shifting and people are going to start looking at things under the hood a lot sooner. Because again, the impact financially on their overhead expense just continues to be greater and greater, to some point where if they don't do anything, what they're spending for benefits might be as much, if not more, than what they're paying people. And that's, it's really nuts to even conceptualize that. But the way healthcare costs are rising, if they continue to and kick the can down the road and do the status quo, they're going to get to a point where there's going to be level footing in what they're spending for healthcare and what they're spending to pay people to work for their company. And it's never been that way. It's usually been, I've just continued to see a meteoric rise in the distribution of what employee benefits is costing an employer today than it did 10, 15, 20 years ago.
That must be hurtful to watch the
It
numbers.
is. Well, especially when you know how to fix it and they
Mm.
just are reluctant to do it for whatever reason. If it's, again, it's disrupting the apple cart, or it's getting defensive from an HR standpoint, or the CFO's college roommate is been their benefits advisor for 20 years. You know what I'm saying? There's a multitude of
Well, this is
reasons.
the most common situation, by the way. That's why I started with, if benefits is not run by a cousin, because I
Right.
mean, that's what I meant. Because
Right.
this is the biggest status quo that you can ever find in the organization, because people will defend that status quo with their
Right.
teeth. Okay. And
And in that example, what motivation would that cousin have of doing anything that would disrupt their relationship with their cousin or cause them to a point where they would go another direction? Nothing.
absolutely, and I can tell you more that there are some brokers and some TPAs who currently, when they face that kind of situation, they go like, "Hey, even if I will save you that amount of money and you will still be able to pay that cousin, then will you will
Oh,
you actually?" That's a very common situation.
I've done that as well. I've done it where, you know what, keep your cousin as your agent of record, bring us in from a consultative approach, and we'll work off of a fee or a percentage of savings and pay them whatever you want to pay them. But let us come
Yeah.
in and fix what's clearly broken. I've taken that approach in the past.
It's very, very difficult to change someone's mind. Firstly, because they need to admit they were wrong. And people don't like to admit that they're wrong.
No,
And I
of course
hope
not.
that in 2026, more employers will start the process of reviewing their healthcare plan as early as possible. And that early will not be October, November, because that's not early. Brokers like you and people like you in general will share information. I mean, personally, I start with early review every single conversation that I have. I'm trying to explain to people, guys, you don't have time. Brokers don't have time to relax in January, because they need to work on their prospecting and everything. And employers don't have time to relax in January, because they have lots of things on their healthcare plan to work on and educate themselves and do things. It's all the process. I mean, people think really that, hey, I will review something and, if I will like it, I will just switch. This is the main problem that causes all the noise within employees, because the switch goes like this. And of course, there are lots of, you know, problems. But if you will start negotiation with someone like you, for example, at the beginning of the year, and you will study the client's company, the prospect's company, you will be able to communicate with employees, market the future change.
Right.
That transition will be smooth and painless, as opposed to
Right.
just, crazy switch by the end of November.
That's the problem. They don't think that way. They don't realize it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. And they feel like anything in our world is turnkey and like turning a light switch, and it just isn't. You can't go from fully insured to self-funded and like a light switch, or traditional self-funded to reference-based pricing, and think you can just turn on the light switch within a couple of weeks and it's go time. It takes months between many different things, implementing, educating, um, there's a lot of things that are rolled up into that they just don't think about because they're not in the world we live in every single day. And we know that. That's why I try to stress starting early. Like you said, it's just sometimes they just, it's not high on their priority list. It's a priority list item for them in the fall or the early winter. And that's way too late to make anything that's going to be meaningful for them from a change perspective. and it
They
be right. That it could be a disaster. You do something in the last minute, and it's going to be a disaster. You've got to have a lot of lead time.
they've been trained, Eric. They've been trained by the incumbent for years,
Sure.
saying that they have time and incumbents. Well, I used to work with the big insurers, okay, not for them, but with them on different projects. And I know exactly how they are patient and how they play the long game that most brokers even can't because they don't have enough resources or they're not patient enough. But they train employers just like um, Apple, trains their users to use iOS. It's different, yes, from
Right.
Android, but once you train your client, it's very difficult to switch to Android because now
Right.
you're an iOS person, okay?
Correct.
And that's what they do. They train them for years and years, and then employers go like, okay, I have this open enrollment, I don't know, in the mid-November. Let me review that in the beginning of November, like take a couple of meetings. Oh, I didn't like this broker. He didn't smell good. Okay, bye. That's what happens, really.
Yeah. Well, it's
Okay.
like it's like a form of entrapment. Like they 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 drag their feet. I see it in the procurement world when you're the incumbent and you're asked for data and you're no dummy. You know why the employer's asking for it because they're looking at making a change maybe with another advisor. They slow play it. They drag their feet. They maybe give you 90% of the data you need, and then you got to wait another couple of weeks to get the other 10%. And by then it's like too late. It's November 1st and we got open enrollment in a couple weeks. So, we're just going to stay the course for next year and talk to us next fall. I've been doing this way too long. I get the slow
Exactly. That's
playing.
exactly what happens. I mean,
Yeah.
I hear brokers saying that every single time. That's why I keep telling them, guys, focus on a very small number of potential clients, but you have to go mile deep, inch wide and mile deep, with these guys because otherwise it's gonna I mean, the same cycle is repeating every single year
Yeah.
because
It's
that's what
right.
fully insured companies taught those clients to do.
Yep. It's rinse and repeat every year. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Same process. 100%.
Yeah, and it it's I really hope it changes, but without lots of brokers doing a lot of deep prospecting work where they will see no reward for short term, but in long term they will, this process, in my opinion, will not change. And I'll
Yeah.
tell you why. Because if you don't have lots of qualified brokers who are ready to take all the patience in the world and actually work on the prospect to change their mind. Fully insured, I mean, the big box companies will always win because they do that. They do have
Right.
time. They go, they train their clients, and brokers don't.
No, no. You know what though? The fully insured world and the big box buka carriers aren't going anywhere, but slowly but surely the market share is going to start moving the other direction unless they decide to pivot to something that's going to be cost containment wise, solution wise, beneficial for the employer. Because if not, if they don't do anything, eventually it's going to come to an impasse where employers are going to go, I just can't float this any longer. It's just way too expensive. And we keep seeing the costs go up and deductibles and coverage becomes leaner and leaner. It's a polar opposites. You want your benefits. That's the thing is that if speaking to an HR person, if you can promise to take those dollars that you're saving the company and repurpose them back into the employees from a value and from a lower in payroll deductions, lower deductibles, richer benefits. Why, if you picture it that way, that helps kind of ease the mind of HR and they back off and they're not as defensive as they are because they see the benefits not only for themselves but also from a recruitment and retention standpoint.
I'm so passionate about this change because if it was, I mean, years ago I worked for a Lloyd's broker who was just property casualty, and we did some of marine, and it was like pure numbers, and we were working with very wealthy men, and when you have that kind of situation, it's just about numbers and you don't care much. I mean, you don't put personal experience into it, but when you're working with healthcare, right, and you have all these people's lives involved, and you have someone not doing a brain scan because they cannot afford it until it's too late, and people are, postponing MRIs and,
Right.
life-saving procedures.
Hmm.
And it's people's lives on stake. There are some people who are like single mothers who are working two jobs to pay some medications for their kids that can be actually provided free of charge or at a very significant discount. And just because the employer stays ignorant to this and everybody is choosing this safe and easy path that they've been doing the same way for 20 years, people's lives are actually involved there. So it's not just about money. And every time when we get in negotiation on behalf of our brokers, I mean, I involve this point there as well, because I, as an employer myself, I mean, I'm communicating with these people. And how can you not care if you don't have any personal interest in that and you still are paying this money? How can you not care about people's lives?
Here's the problem I run into a lot is I try to convince C-suite and people that are of influence in the decision-making process, think through the lens of some of their employees that make the least amount of money. It's easy for them to think through and look through a lens of somebody that's making multiple six figures that can afford a $5,000 deductible and they can pay out of pocket. 50% of this country can't even afford a an emergency $500 medical bill right now. They don't have it in their account. You know what I'm saying? It's like the people that are the top 1% of the country that are in those positions, they don't think that way. They're only thinking, what's the big deal? While somebody that, like you said, that's working two or three jobs, that's living paycheck to paycheck, that has three kids, might be a single parent, that's taking on a huge deductible, and their son is taking this maintenance medication that's costing hundreds of dollars a month. They got to make a decision if they're going to make their mortgage payment or they're going to get their child's medicine.
Or the
And
food on the
right,
table?
they don't think that way, unfortunately. And getting them to wrap their heads around that sometimes, I mean,
I
it
mean, not
works.
not all of people's problems should be solved, but if you as an
No,
employer can solve them, then why not? That's the
right,
point.
correct, correct.
And they can.
They can. It takes a little elbow grease. It takes a little, rolling up your sleeves. And what we do to kind of buck the status quo and be a disruptor is not easy. It's a lot of work, but it's impactful. It works. You just got to want it. You got to have the passion like we do to kind of preach the gospel and kind of educate people on how to do it and how fulfilling it is once you get through that minutia and the educating and the communicating and going through some bumps with the significant change from what they were typically doing in their nice little, comfortable bundled anthem approach, and doing things that are going to be rewarding both financially and from a value perception standpoint to their employees.
You just mentioned a very interesting thing. You cannot be, independent broker in 2026 if you're not passionate about it. That's for sure. If you're just in it for money, forget it. You need to be passionate. You need to have this drive. And it's like super important. Like, by the way, you know that most people got into this industry, into healthcare and insurance industry accidentally. I just read a report from Business Insurance that 2025 they, uh, you know, qu- uh, created a snapshot of an insurance professional, and it turns out that 61.3% of respondents say that they stumped into the industry of insurance. So they didn't choose that. It's like, insurance choose us.
Right. No, I've seen a lot of like former athletes and, you know, college athlete stars and that get into insurance eventually. I can name several. So yeah, I get
Wow.
it. I'm one of the few that actually wanted to do this ever since I was, taking actual exams in high school. So this was what I set out to do. I wanted to get into this in some form or fashion. It started as an actuary, and eventually it evolved into being a benefits advisor.
That's very impressive. And by the way, about the athletes, I thought they were more of a like real estate brokers. No, I'm
No,
wrong.
some of them get into that, but I mean, they get into these financial services type. Like the funny thing is, they think because they were famous or they are famous, they feel like they can walk into any employer's doors and feel like without knowing anything about what they're talking about, they can write business. And it just doesn't work that way. I'm sorry.
Well, this beginner's confidence, come on.
Yeah,
We all had it, and it's a good thing to have it.
sure.
But the insurance industry is so rough. I don't know. I don't envy anyone getting into this business in 2026 for sure, because you need to have guts for that. It's really a tough year. It's a period when really employers are not answering the phone. It's very difficult. The whole cycle of the deal is getting longer and longer, and you need more actions, and you need to stick to your goals. And it's not like it was like 10 years ago or 15 years ago when you just, made a call, got an appointment, and then you were able to sit in front of the person. Now it's like the whole quest in order to do this.
Right.
And what can I say? You really need to be passionate about what you do and really disciplined.
Yeah.
Speaking of, what is your morning routine?
Well, I'm an early riser, so I'm raring to go on the laptop by 6 a.m. So I spend the majority of the morning prospecting and doing some of my legwork and research from an email, from a LinkedIn standpoint. And then I usually spend after the lunch hour doing more of prospecting from.
Legwork and prospecting at the same time or
Yes,
separately?
yeah, yeah,
Okay,
and then
I
getting
like
into.
it.
Yeah. And then in the afternoon, when people are more readily available and they're awake, reaching out to them, you know, via cell phone, office number, and trying to have conversations and stir up opportunities that way. And then obviously I got meetings and stuff, but that's kind of my ritual in the morning is focusing on emails and LinkedIn and connecting that way at the same time. And then afternoon, getting into live chats and virtual meetings and things like this to just to, again, try to get at bats and preach the gospel and try to educate people on how to really fix what's probably really broken in a lot of their benefit programs, particularly around what they're doing on a health insurance standpoint.
Do you have plans on educating people through some kind of mass, I don't know, show or something like that, or maybe
It,
producing videos?
yes, it's funny you mentioned that. I was actually talking to a vendor today about trying to schedule a in-person event that I feel like sometimes goes much farther than doing the virtual thing or a video thing
That's
with
true.
local employers here in the state, but they were very interested in that, in being live to talk about what differentiates them, and they're very unique in what they do in the healthcare industry that I think I could capture a lot of people's attention because again it's around pharmacy. That's the thing. It's what they're doing from an application standpoint with what they're doing with pharmacy and cash payments and bringing in those sorts of like the good RXs and things into one um repository is really impactful, and I think I haven't seen anything like that in the industry. So yeah, I'm trying to do things like that more now that we're kind of hitting the reset button, get going here in 2026.
Yeah, that's a great idea. In person, of course, it's like 10 times more than online. But then
Yeah,
again, you can do online like every single week. You cannot
right,
do in
true,
person
true.
every single week. So, I mean, you can do both, obviously. And you're great on camera. So,
I appreciate that.
I'm sure that more people are, ready to listen and hear your message,
Yeah,
not just
no,
listen, but hear. That's also important. So yeah. And one more thing is,
sure.
what would you advise as a person who's been in this business for so long? What would you advise for to a newbie in this market, like someone who's stepping in, they're trying to play on your field with self-funding, and they're trying
Hmm.
to help you and other, you know, people, what would you tell them?
I
How
would
would you encourage
number
them?
one on their own. For their own, I think they should study hard, and there's a lot available in it's a technology age. Social media, LinkedIn, there's a lot you can learn about the industry just through social media and connecting with people that are subject matter experts. But then the other thing would be if you're new in the industry, try to latch on to a mentor that's been doing it as long as someone like myself, because either within the company you're working with, or, you're a new to the working world, you just graduated from Indiana University or some school, look on LinkedIn and people that are in the industry that you went to school at the same university that they went to. They would love to hear from you and kind of have a mentor or protege type of relationship. Those are the two things I think if you're a 22, 23-year old just fresh out of college and you want to get into the industry, those are the two tips I would strongly encourage them to do to kind of really accelerate their growth for whatever it is to do within the employee benefits world.
Such a valuable lesson. And by the way, I want to underline the second part, which is find the mentor, because when you're on the other side, like I remember myself when I was new on the market, I was always like scared to approach someone because I thought that they're like super busy, they cannot talk to me, or I didn't find value in myself. I mean, obviously I was in a different industry, but still. And then I figured out that if you're useful, and that's important, guys, you have to be useful in some way. You have to be good in something. Like, for example, I was always good in marketing. So when I approached, insurance world, and that was property casualty and marine, I instantly opened the doors to many companies that were out there. And marketing, it was like, I don't know, it was 2007, okay?
Hmm.
And so it was, like, not so common as it is today,
Right.
and, these companies needed me, and I needed their experience. And by the way, also, guys, those of you who will find the mentor, don't worry about money that much. Don't try to negotiate your salary and et cetera, et cetera. I always negotiated time. I always said, like, "Give me an hour of your time, or give me 2 hours of your time." And I
Yeah.
sat and I just asked questions and listened. And this is really super valuable thing, like 100%. I agree.
No, but you hit the nail on the head though. You got to be a good listener. You got to listen and take copious notes and just be a sponge. Don't try to pretend like you know more than you actually do. Just listen, and it's probably the best advice you could give a new producer, a new service person, new account manager, whoever it is that is looking to kind of dip their toe in the water in benefits or insurance brokerage consulting. I would You got to be a good listener, especially early on in your career.
Absolutely. That was an amazing talk, by the way. I enjoyed listening to you, Eric,
Great.
for
Thank you.
sure.
Yeah.
I I heard lots of things that made me see you as a true person who's passionate about what he does, and you will not stop until you change this market, will you?
Nope. Nope. I have friends that are in other industries like officers, firemen that are talking about retirement. I'm like, and they ask me, and I'm like, I'm not retiring. I'm like, I love this too much. I said, yeah, will I downsize how much I dedicate in time when I'm in my 60s and maybe in my 70s? Sure. But I'd be too bored to just go cold turkey and no longer do this. I've been doing it too long and I enjoy it. It's extremely fulfilling to me because I feel like it's impacting tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people that I'm involved with when it comes to benefits.
It is a really life-changing thing for lots of people, and this is the best way you can impact them in insurance world.
Yeah. No,
That's healthcare.
I really enjoyed this. I'd love to do it. I didn't know how good I would be at it, but I feel like I was pretty decent at it. So that's great.
Well, I'm sure that 2026 will be life-changing for your company as well, in a perfect and a good way. And all the events are going to help you. Eric, thank you so much for being on Prospecting Broker. Tell me one thing that you would like all employers to hear if this message would go to all employers in the world, what would be like 1, 2, 3 sentences?
I would just say be open minded to think outside the box and listen to somebody that's coming in with an innovative, creative difference than you've not heard of before when it comes to benefits, and at least give them the proper attention because most likely they know what they're talking about and it's going to be extremely beneficial to them.
There you go, guys. Be open minded. I hope you're listening to that, CEOs, CFOs, and especially HRs. We'll love you.
Yes.
Have a great day. Thank you very much for being on the show,
Great.
and we'll see you again hopefully soon.
Thanks, Margot. Appreciate it.